Like if I give you a table, okay, let's say I gave you a frequency one. So let's say my time was 0 to 4. Okay, what is the class width there? That's an old definition. Class width is how far it is from where one starts to when the next one starts. So 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, all these have a class width of 5. The new question I'm going to ask you today is the class midpoint. So the midpoint is the middle. So in this one, okay, my class width is 5. What do you think the midpoint would be? 2.5. It's just the middle. So my midpoint, if you add up those and divide by 2, you get a midpoint of 2.5. The midpoint here, if I added up 10 and 5, 7. You get 7.5. Those are the class midpoints. It's the middle. So it's from the beginning of one class to the beginning of the next. Finding the middle there. Add them up and divide by 2. You notice how far apart are these midpoints? 5, which is the class width. Once you get the first one, if you just add your class width, you would get every one following that. So the class midpoint. We take the sum of consecutive lower class limits and divided by 2. Or it's just the average. The lower class limits is where the class starts, so the upper class limit would be where it ends. So we use these sometimes when we are asked to make what's called a frequency polygon. And so a frequency polygon is kind of like a line graph. We will use Google Sheets for this. So we use points, connected by line segments. To show class frequencies. The points are placed at class midpoints. And the graph is connected to the x-axis. when we did talking about class frequencies, we used the Old Faithful example, I think, because we said, we had so many different times. It really didn't make sense just to make a frequency distribution where you put each of those times. So we did a range. We said it erupted between 670 and 679, and 680 and 689. So this one, it's really nothing for us to do. I'm just kind of talking about. So I put these graphs on your slides. So this was the frequency distribution we made, but I added a new column to it. So we did the frequency and relative frequencies together in class in a previous section. The midpoints. So looking at this, what's my class width? 10. That's how far it is from one class to the beginning of the next. So half of 10 is 5. So if we start at 670, 5 above that is 675. Or you could add up 670 and 680 and divide by 2. You get 675. 685, 695. So those are my class midpoints. When you make your polygon, those are what you put on your x-axis. So if we wanted to do this in Google Sheets, do you guys want to, let's just practice that. So open up Google Sheets. So we can look at different options. You change styles, you can go in and add points, all that stuff, change your, so I'm going to go ahead and add a point. So it's a little more obvious. And so that put my points for my midpoints. Now there is one issue with this. I said that in a frequency polygon, you had to have your points at all your midpoints, and what else did it have to do? Look back at your definition. What was the last thing I wrote down about the frequency polygon? It had to connect to the x-axis. Does mine connect to the x-axis? No. So what we actually need to do is go back and add in another point. So if you think about these, what would be the midpoint right before 675? 665. And my frequency of that would be 0 because we didn't have any. And you notice what happened right there. It connected to my axis. So we need to do the same thing at the end. So I'm going to add in 745 and 0 so it connects that one down to the axis. So when you're drawing these, you'll always have to go in and add in a point at the beginning and end with a frequency of 0. I inserted a row above. Okay. Right. Can everybody figure out how to insert a row above? Yeah. If you highlight it, you can go to insert one row.
What? Because I didn't put up the titles on there.
Oh, okay.
And so I came up with
Okay. And if that happens, you can change the chart height too. So
I just put insert it.
So that we can put it.
Oh, then for you to get like up here.
And then you can highlight all of that. All right, other questions? Okay, so I could just give you a table like this, and some of your homework will be that, and maybe even one on the quiz tomorrow, and ask you questions. So I might say, looking at this graph, what's the class width? So you're just looking from one point to the next. How far does it go? 10. My scale is kind of funky on this, but I would give you a good one that has an easy to read scale. I might say, what's the midpoint of the first class? Now, did this first and last point really exist? No. And I know that I added those in. So the first true point was right here. So the midpoint was my x value, which is 675. Or I might say, what's the frequency of the third class? So I know that would be the first, the second, that would be the third one, and my frequency was 7. So I could ask you some questions about that. I formatted my graph. So, when I had it selected, that right there, under series, I think my point. So you can get bigger or smaller. You're welcome. Okay. So we know how these graphs are made and how to read them. So the last things I have, if you're following along in the book, because I'm sure you guys do that, right? They give you another type. I'll go ahead and tell you what it is, but I am not going to assess this one. So this is called an ogive, and what it shows is your cumulative frequency. So we know how to make relative frequencies, right? Your cumulative frequency adds up all the frequencies before that. So if my first one had a frequency of 0.2, then we would have that. And then if the next one was 0.2, then 0.2 plus 0.2, we're up to 4. If the next one was 0.2, then we'd be up to 0.6. And so it just adds them all up so that it ends at 1 every time. This one was cumulative frequency, so you add up every total before that. So for instance, with my Old Faithful example, if you look at your eruptions, how many times it had erupted. So we had, let's see in our table, this one had a frequency of 2. So if I were graphing the cumulative frequency, we'd just do a 2 here. This one, 0 plus 2, we'd still be graphing 2. 7 plus 2, we'd be graphing 9, 18, and so forth. I'm not going to assess that, so it won't be on any homework, test, quizzes, but I thought I'd go ahead and mention what it is. The last thing is time series plot, and it's really just like a line graph, except, or like our frequency polygon, except it doesn't have to connect to 0. So it just shows where you are at a given point in time. So if we just look at, this is a time series plot. So graphing it on sheets, you would do exactly how we did, except you don't have to put in that first and last point of 0. And you don't have to find your midpoints. You just put in the year and the value and use a line graph to connect them. So those are pretty straightforward, probably exactly what you would have done if I told you to graph that and I hadn't told you what a time series plot was. You just connect them with a line. Questions for me? Okay. So, a few things. Homework, I do not want you to do, we are not going to do problem 15. So this is your assignment. You have class time to work on it. I also wanted to give out MACC packets